Welcome to Loyola Marymount University. I'm Fernando Guerra, professor and director of the Center for the Study of Los Angeles. Today, we're going to be talking about the Olympics and the possibility of Los Angeles hosting the Olympics for the third time in 2024. To have this discussion, we have three very knowledgeable individuals about what is going on, what our chances are, the advantages of Los Angeles, and why we're going to get the Olympics in 2024. We have with us John Harper. He is the Chief Operating Officer of LA2024. Also with us is Jeff Millman. He's the Chief Communications Officer for LA2024. And in addition, we have Anita DeFrantz, who is the U.S. and IOC member and Senior Advisor for Legacy and LA2024. Also, obviously, an Olympian and a medal winner in the 1976 Olympics. And we'll get her perspective as well. Interestingly enough, let's start with you, John. LA 2024 just started. Can you kind of explain to us the organizational nature of it and when you got started and what you were doing before?
Absolutely. Well, and first of all, thank you to you, Fernando and Brianna, and all of you for having us in. It's certainly an exciting topic that we enjoy talking about on a daily basis, and hopefully you'll have a lot of questions for us as well.
Yeah, and the first question is going to be, where do we get tickets and all that kind of stuff? But,
exactly. So to answer your question, without going too far back, this process started probably 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, in the summer of 2014. And really that process was what we called a domestic bid process. The United States Olympic Committee, the USOC, because there are so many able and willing cities in the United States, unlike other countries, to be able to potentially host the games, they have a process where they go through a diligence to determine what city the U.S. would like to bid for the games if the United States decides to bid for the games. Mm-hmm. So in the summer of 2014, they made the decision to bid for the games, and ourselves, along with...
That the U.S. would bid for the games.
Correct.
And then it asks cities to then think about being that one city.
Exactly. Okay. So there were probably about 35 cities that initially put their hat in the ring, but that quickly got thrown down or whittled down to about 4 cities. Got down to 4 cities, ourselves, Boston, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. And it was primarily a technical process. We were going through about a 7-month diligence process around what our plan could look like. So the United States Olympic Committee would have ultimately 4 cities that could potentially put on the games that they could choose from and vote. Mm-hmm. In January of 2015, they made the vote, and they selected Boston to actually go forward as the U.S. city.
So they thought Boston was better than L.A.
They made
on what basis, on what possible metrics could they make that decision?
Well, there was a lot of different discussions that went on. Primarily, it was around the technical plans that were put forth, and they made the decision to go to Boston. Obviously, we were disappointed, but we certainly kept discussions going internally with the city and our small team that we had built to be able to put on that domestic internal process.
So how did you take it personally?
It was tough. I mean, Jeff and I were part of that domestic process along with a small group of people, but we knew we had a really solid plan, and we had a great team led by Casey Wasserman and the mayor of Los Angeles. And so when everything happened in July, we won't go into all those details, but ultimately Boston and the USOC decided to part ways and really came back to Los Angeles as an opportunity to really be the host city, or the bid city. Yeah. And so the mayor and Casey had some discussions and really tried to understand, is this right for the city? And ultimately, they decided that it was. And so we, as we described, we kind of got the gang back together fairly quickly. We sped to a launch in September of last year that really officially threw our hat in the ring with the IOC, and that kicked off the official process.
And so that you personally, when did you start working for LA 2024?
So I was a part of the domestic process that I just described, in part with my old role at Wasserman Media Group as part of the consulting team. But it was right around September of last year where I officially transitioned over to the bid organization. And as you described, leading the operations of the bid team and building that team, but also really trying to put the functional processes in place to address the IOC process, which I think was your second part to your question.
Right. Hey, Jeff, I've been an observer of LA politics for a long time, observing mayors, and specifically Mayor Garcetti. And he was very aggressive about this. He went out on a limb to a greater degree than I've seen him on other issues. you've worked for him for a long time. Number one, describe your previous position with him, but then also, why was the mayor so supportive? And on different policies, I've seen him be pretty proactive, but on this one, he was way out there.
That's right. He on his first day in office, he sent a letter to the United States Olympic Committee asking them to bring the games, asking them to select Los Angeles as the U.S. candidate city on his first day. So he has always wanted the games to come back to L.A. He has very fond memories of attending the games. In 1984,
Yeah, how old was he?
he was, I think, 11. 11 or 13, and he was sitting. Was it 13? Yeah, he was 13. He was sitting at the Coliseum for the opening ceremony. He saw some wonderful track and field events, and he would love to bring his daughter to the games. 8 years from now, it just would sort of come full circle. But he feels strongly that that the '84 experience was a time when our city really came together. We have a very, as you know, Fernando, better than anybody in the city. We have a very diverse city, and we celebrate that diversity all the time. But the Olympics in '84 and hopefully in 2024 is an opportunity for us to bring a very, very diverse city together around a common experience, a very, very positive experience that promotes healthy lifestyles and activity and really welcoming the world to a new city that is maybe one of the most diverse cities in the world.
Yeah, but there was a political cost. I mean, there was instant criticism. There was like, why is this a priority compared to other things? Why are you focusing so much on that?
Well, the mayor was very good at multitasking. I mean,
That's an excuse I get from my students about if they could turn in the assignment a little bit later. There was an assignment due today.
Okay. He's everybody turn in your assignments on time, please. And let us know who's winning the Nevada caucuses. The mayor was focused, as you know, on a back to basics agenda, and that his focus on that never wavered. The Olympics was never a priority above his relentless management and delivery of city services, which is exactly what the voters of Los Angeles elected him to do. In the mayor's office, there was a small group of people, including me, who had been working on the Olympic project since the summer of 2014, along with John and two other colleagues at Wasserman. So it didn't divert too much attention and focus within the mayor's office, and the mayor does believe that the Olympics is really an opportunity to complement and highlight the wonderful city we have and what they're doing in city government to make our city even greater.
So you just gave me a gift. We're at a private university, so I can accept it.
Sure.
No problem. It's a beautiful design, and we saw it on the film of the angel. It almost looks like it could be a diver of some sort. Who designed it, and what's it supposed to elicit?
It was designed actually by some folks that work right down this hill at 72 and Sunny. And the design obviously evokes the city's founding name, which is the City of Angels. Los Angeles means in Spanish the angels.
I didn't know that.
And many people don't actually. I think all of us in Los Angeles do know that, and we're very proud of our founding and our heritage. But I don't know, many people maybe internationally do not know that, and we wanted to pay great homage to our founding and our multicultural city and origins. But as you notice, the figure in that logo is an athletic figure. It really does represent, I think, the aspirations of our city and aspiration of athletes.
And then we just happened to see right before you guys got here the film, and you saw a large part of it. Tell us about that film, what it's supposed to evoke, and you just released it like within 24 hours.
Actually, you guys, it's actually going to be released publicly tomorrow.
Oh, so you guys are the first ones to see it?
Yeah, you guys have
Wow.
a sneak peek at it. It will be released tomorrow publicly, but we wanted to show it here early for you guys because we're really proud of it. Very, very exciting. It will run as a trailer in Regal movie theaters throughout the Los Angeles area. Select, not everyone, but select theaters throughout Los Angeles. So that's exciting. If you guys are going to see a movie this weekend, you know, in the run up to the Oscars, you can see this again. You guys will know all that. You guys will see it.
Yeah, but it's got, I mean, obviously, Jessica Alba, Will Ferrell, Lou Gaines was on there, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the other Olympian she's...
Kobe?
No, well, I saw Kobe, yeah, Kobe, come on, it's like, come on, Lakers nowadays?
Oh, I'm
It's
sorry,
like,
yeah.
it's like, no, we don't talk about the Lakers lately. Besides, we're neighbors of the Clippers, which are right
That's
down
right,
the street
correct,
here.
correct.
But there was another Olympian on
Janet
there.
Evans.
Yes,
Yep.
Janet Evans, who, great Olympian.
She works with us every day on our staff. She's on our staff as a staff member of ours, and she is probably the greatest female swimmer of all time.
Yeah, how many medals is like...
She won 5 medals, and she established many world records that were only broken after they came out with
new
these
swimsuits.
special swimsuits that have since been banned.
Yeah.
So she's an incredible athlete and an incredible colleague for us.
Anita DeFrantz. When you think Olympics, at least when I think Olympics, I think of Anita DeFrantz. It's a pleasure to meet you at the local level, at the national level, at the international level. She's been a member of the IOC, the International Olympic Committee, the U.S. Olympic Committee, and of course, very local efforts. She was a participant in the 1976 Olympics, won a medal, and she was obviously very important when we held the Olympics here in 1984. There's a lot of acronyms and a lot of different levels. If you can walk us through who's the IOC, what's the USOC, the locals, and how do they relate to each other, and what has been your role in each one of those, including LA2024, which I really didn't mention, but you just retired from that position, and you were replaced by Renata Simmerl, who was actually a student of mine in this class many years ago. So, please.
Sure. It's a family, huh?
Yes.
The International Olympic Committee was created in 1894, and the Pierre de Coubertin was sometimes called the founder of that organization, and some people believe that it was really a peace organization. Many of the people who were a part of the early years of the IOC were later part of the peace movement, and indeed a woman who was the secretary to Albert Nobel was the person who set up the Nobel Peace Prize. You probably didn't know that a woman was the person who set up the Nobel Peace Prize. And if I could remember her name, I would tell you, but it's written.
Somebody's
so
going to
you can find
Google it right now, and we'll get that name to you.
Thank you very much. So the IOC
Actually,
was,
not Google it, search it.
search it, there we go. The IOC was created as a Swiss association, and well, now it's a Swiss association. It was created as a French association, and Pierre de Coubertin's goal was in part to figure out how to make France better at winning wars, and then as he searched the world to find out how to do that, he realized that maybe peace was a better idea than winning wars. And when you look at the early IOC members, you'll see that some of them have names that are famous. But the IOC was very quiet. The IOC existed after international sports federations. So international sports federations such as, dare I say, the IAAF or FIFA are independent of the IOC, but they have applied to be on the program of the Olympic Games. So international federations are separate. They would exist whether or not the International Olympic Committee existed. National Olympic Committees, the USOC is one of 206 National Olympic Committees. They exist only because the International Olympic Committee exists. And they were created to help develop the Olympic movement within their own country, and ultimately they have the sole authority to enter athletes to compete at the Olympic Games. Now, that's kind of the overview. There are 3 primary organizations: the IOC, that owns the Games and protects the Games, the National Olympic Committees, who promote the Olympic movement within their territories, and the International Sports Federations. Now, it's interesting to note that before an NOC, National Olympic Committee, can be recognized by the IOC, they have to have at least 5 sports federations, And each of those national federations has to have been recognized by their international federation. So there's a lot of collusion, you might say. And in fact, because I am an IOC member, I must serve on the board of the United States Olympic Committee. So I am, in a sense, an interlocking directorate, which in some parts of history is thought to be terrible, bad. Other people understand that if that's what it is, that's what it is, because I represent the IOC in my country. Some people think I represent the United States at the IOC. How could I not? I am very much an American. I'm very proud. I represented the nation as an Olympian, but my duty is to represent the IOC in my home country.
So how did you get elected or chosen to be on the IOC? What's that process like?
Someone died. Started with that.
Okay, well, number one, someone died, but there's still a couple of billion of us left who would like to be on the IOC.
And so far I'm alive too, so I hold that position. In my case it's impossible. I shouldn't be an IOC member. One of, at the time, there were probably 270 million people in this country. It's 1986. The way it works, I know now, I didn't know at the time, is that the International Olympic Committee has a board called the Executive Board, and it's the Executive Council, and in fact, sometimes it's considered the government of the IOC. And the Executive Board is the one who recommends to the full board candidates to become members. The USOC,
Very similar to what a Board of Trustees at a Loyola Marymount University does, how we select our Board of Trustees, and very similar to the way corporations end up selecting directors.
yes, a little bit less like a corporate, but we are self-perpetuating.
Right.
We elect our own members. And when I was elected, I was called, there was only one type of membership, and that was, now I have to call it the individual membership. Now we have people who are ex officio members of the IOC, which means that they were elected because of their office. For example, Larry Probst is president of the United States Olympic Committee, and he has been elected to the IOC. Angela Ruggiero, also an Angelino, was elected to the IOC by her peers at among the athletes. During the time of the games, there's an election for 2 athletes for the Olympic Winter Games, and 4 athletes from the Olympic Games are elected to serve as IOC members, and they serve for a term of one term of 8 years. They're full members of the IOC during that period of time, and unfortunately, when they finish, they're just gone. If you serve for 10 years or more, you're eligible to become an honorary member, which means that you can continue to go to the games, but you cannot speak at the session. You might be asked to do things by the president of the IOC, but otherwise, you're there, but without portfolio.
So, so how many members are there of the IOC?
We have capped the membership at 115. This was done under the program of IOC 2000. We had some issues that arose in the years leading up to the millennium, and we had a commission called IOC. In the international sports world, everything's called a commission instead of a committee, but that's what it is. If I say commission, I mean a committee. The commission was given the responsibility to review all that the IOC was and to make recommendations to reform it. And there were many reforms, including the ability to elect important members of national Olympic committees, presidents, executive directors, members of international sports federations, essentially presidents or executive directors, and athletes to membership.
So you competed in the 1976 Olympics, which were held in Montreal.
Yes.
It is often quoted that Montreal, the city of Montreal, went into debt $1 billion.
Boulder Dash.
Okay, well, let's just go with that. Well, it could have been Canadian money, so that's like different, right?
I don't know what the word is for that.
Yeah, but nonetheless, it was very expensive. Within that $1 billion, they also talk about infrastructure projects that really had
You think?
nothing to do with.
Would you
They
put
had
the
something to do with the Olympics, but they lasted for a long time.
Yeah, would
Whether
you
it was
put
a
the
stadium,
cost of a
rail.
new stadium, a new subway system on a 2-week sport event? Really?
Yeah.
Who would do that?
Right.
And there weren't the Paralympic Games then, so it was purely the Olympic Games. So you would never, it would be insanity to think that you could make enough off of tickets for 2 weeks of sport to pay for a whole subway system, to pay for venues, to pay for the village, which remains there as housing, all these capital construction things. And it is true that the mayor was very much entranced with a French architect who designed things in a special, some engineers here will understand, thin shell concrete, which could be designed anywhere in the world, but could not be constructed in Canada at the time. So they actually flew pieces of the stadium from France to Montreal. Now, you can understand how the unions might feel about something like that. And so there was a bit of apprehension and anger, I'll say, among the unions, and also some delay. And thus, we had some issues about cost overruns with building things on time, because unlike me, perhaps, when the time is the time, you have to be there when it starts, and you can't say, okay, we'll get to this next week. The games are at a time certain, and everybody's there and ready to go, so you can't get the venues finished a little bit later.
Yeah, but we know that the narrative, not only of Montreal, but, Sochi and, Moscow, et cetera, that it's really gone too far, that we're spending way too much money for this 2-week event, 3-week event.
Wrong.
But that is a narrative.
It's wrong.
Yeah, what's nice about that narrative for LA
Yes.
is that they always call out LA as the exception.
Absolutely.
That it was in LA where, quote unquote, we didn't have a deficit, et cetera. In fact, we had so much money left over that in the last 30 to 40 years, we spent over a $250 million of dollars on local sports programs with the money that was left over from the '84 Olympics. And you were very much involved in that. Talk to us about what LA2024 is, how it came about, and what it's been doing.
Okay, let me apologize first. We didn't do a good job, the IOC did not do a good job of explaining Sochi, because they went from 0 to 100% in 7 years. They had nothing there, and they built everything they needed for winter sports, training centers, and installation, because when they were the Soviet Union, all of that was in one of the republics. Once they were no longer the Soviet Union, they had nothing. So that's why it costs whatever it was, $billion, because they went from 0 to 100% in 7 years. Now, back to answer your question.
Yeah.
The LA2024
That's still a
Foundation-
lot of money, $50 billion to.
But it's there. The hotels were full the last 2 years since the games. It
Okay.
has been successful, and it'll be there for another 50, 60, 70 years, longer than we probably will
Yeah,
be around.
yeah.
Anyhow,
But LA,
LA2024 Foundation is the legacy of the '84 Games. It's one of 2 legacies. There were 2 foundations created. The U.S. Olympic Committee, okay, in 1978, it must have been, the USOC made a deal with the organizers in Los Angeles that they would be the financial guarantor of those games. The USOC had $5 million in illiquid assets, and they were guaranteeing a $750 million event. A little bit of a reach, but it worked. Therefore, the USOC was to receive 60% of every dollar that was considered a part of the surplus or profit, whatever you want to call it. We called it the surplus. And they did. They divided their 60% up. 40% went into a foundation, and 20% was divided among all of the national governing bodies, both winter and summer. So they received about $1.2 million apiece after the games. Now, the 40% that stayed in Southern California became the endowment for the LA2024 Foundation. It was originally called the LA1OC, because the USOC said we had to take the word Olympic out of the LAOOC, so it was the LA1OC Foundation. Then became the Amateur Athletic Foundation of Los Angeles, which was entirely too long. Then we became the AAF, and then one day someone called and said, well, how do you spell that? And we said, okay, we need another name.
Yeah.
AAF is pretty direct on how you spell it. So we became the LA2024 Foundation, and we received $93 million, not all at once, but by 1991, we received all of our 40%. And since then, we have put, I say we because until January, I was president of the organization for the last 28 years. So the we is that group now, but not me. But we put the $225 million back into youth sports through teaching people how to coach. We taught over 70,000 people how to coach. We put money into 2,000 programs. We built facilities, we developed programs of all sorts, and we have the best sports library in the world. It's now being digitized, so those things that are not under copyright, by the way, Google said they were going to digitize the world, and we're going, no, you're not, because a lot of things are still under copyright, and you have to protect that. It'll be more important to you as you go along and create things that you want to keep the benefit of. So anything that's on the copyright is still going to be digitized, but it will stay in a server at the foundation. Everything else will be on the server. And by the way, it's available right now, most of it today. If you go to LA2024.org, you can find a lot of information, all the final official reports of the Olympic Games. In fact, we digitized those before the IOC did. And the IOC's internal organ, which for many years was called the Olympic Review, we have digitized in both French and English from the beginning till we have to wait for 2 years to put the newest ones up. So it's an interesting place. It's a vital place, and the place is in a historic building on West Adams, a place that was called, it was built in 1910 when Western was the westernmost edge of the city, and so it was into the suburbs. A place called Sugar Hill, because life was so sweet there. It was called Sugar Hill. And the building, again, is on the National Historic Register as well as the local historic register.
We are at Loyola Marymount University talking about the Olympics and the application by the City of LA to host the Olympics in 2024. We have with us Anita DeFrantz, Jeff Millman, and John Harper. John Harper serves as the COO of LA2024. John, before that, you talked about Casey Wasserman, that you worked for him. Talk to us about Casey and his commitment to this effort and who he is. Explain to the students why Casey Wasserman.
Sure. Well, the best way to describe Casey, first of all, is he is a philanthropist and a passionate Angelino who has been here all his life. I first connected with him as part of the organization he had built called Wasserman Media Group, which is a collaboration, an agency consisting of athlete management, consulting, strategic consulting, which is where I was in, experience, media strategy. Prior to Wasserman Media Group, he was the youngest owner of a professional sports franchise when he brought the LA Avengers to Los Angeles.
I had season tickets.
Exactly, yes. No, and that was in his early to mid-20s. He's the grandson of Lou Wasserman, who helped really grow the media industry here as and part of MCA. And
They called him the last mogul.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. But Casey, and it's probably worth talking, his grandfather obviously was a big part of the Olympics in 1984 as well. So it's in his DNA in growing sports and entertainment in this city, and he's built a global business, that's based here in Westwood. He was, and Jeff can talk about this a little bit more from the city side, but he got involved with this not only from his background and his passion around sports and the Olympics, but with his relationship with Mayor Garcetti, who was really trying to bring, as Jeff described, the Olympics to LA as part of a benefit to the city, but doing it in a way that can really bring out the new Los Angeles, the youth, the energy, that is about new Los Angeles and where all it is going, the ambitions, the reinvention that is going on here, that started, from an Olympic perspective back in 1932, that transformed the games when it came from, really the first Olympic Village to 1984, which Anita described, which was a transformative model for the funding and partnership and sponsorship around the games, to a point where now we want to have a group now led by Casey and the mayor that can start to transform the games again for a new era, which the IOC is undergoing as part of Agenda 2020.
So this is very important. In 1984, at least part of the narrative is that LA changed the Olympics. It changed the way we, put the Olympics and how much money and resources could actually be produced, that it was transformative. Anita?
The difference primarily is that it was done without government support.
Right.
It was all done in the private sector, and the games had never been done in the private sector before. The only backing was from the USOC, as I explained earlier, and so taking that risk was just enormous, and Peter Ubroth was the guy who took on the risk along with the board.
But why did the IOC allow that to happen? I mean, if the IOC had previously prevented that from happening, why did they allow LA to use that model in 84?
The the IOC pretty much came of age in 1980. Before that, IOC members themselves paid their way to games, and people complained about the rich old dudes who were hanging around the games. Well, they kept the games going, and they supported it out of their pockets, so I'm glad the rich old dudes were there making that happen. But what the ILC had done was, what happened was LA actually bid for the games 3 times in a row. And you can go to the LA84 Foundation and see those bid books for 76, for 80, and then for 84. 76, it was Moscow, LA, and Montreal. And guess who got chosen? That was a good choice. Remember, oh, you're too young to know about the Cold War. Ask someone older about the Cold War. The Cold War was raging at that time, so the IOC was very wise in choosing to if you weren't going to go with the Eastern Bloc country, Moscow, to go with a Western Bloc country that wasn't the U.S., which was, of course, at that time the enemy of the Soviet Union. So they selected Montreal, then L.A. bid, and next time it was L.A. and Moscow and maybe one other city, and this time Moscow won. And then LA came back one more time. This time primarily, LA had been bidding against New York for the right to be the host city, the candidate city. And the meeting was at Squaw Valley, and this time was the first time that the Athletes Advisory Council of the USOC, which was created in 1973, the membership in 1977 actually voted and chose LA over New York City. So LA had bid 3 times in a row. So the ILC members figured that LA really won the games, so much so that there were really no other candidates bidding. Now, it is true.
So there were no other candidates bidding U.S. cities or internationally?
Internationally. Now, this
So
was in
that's pretty good. That we had a
1977.
100% chance of winning.
We'd take that today.
Yeah, people like to say that there were, that Tehran was bidding, but there were management issues. They're too young for that, too.
Yeah, but they're good historians. They
Yes,
know
good
about
historians,
the Cold War in 1979, both hostage about, yeah. But so what year is it that LA gets selected to host the 84?
77.
77.
It's supposed to be 7 years in advance of the games.
Games,
that
because you need the
IOC
time,
selects.
right.
Yeah,
right.
because it takes time to do that.
Right, and so in 77, we had just had the 76 Olympic Games. We're about to have the 80 Olympic Games in Moscow, and then in 84. And then, just in case some of the students, because they certainly weren't born, if they're, what happened in 1980? How many medals did the U.S. win in 1980? There's a good trivia question.
Well, you have to ask it 2 ways. First,
Okay.
that was an era when the Olympic Games were in the same year as the summer game. The Olympic Winter Games were in the same year as the Olympic Games.
Right.
So, guess
Yeah.
what? Guess where the 1980 Olympic Winter Games were? In Lake Placid, which is a part of New York, which is a part of our great nation.
Right.
So we were about to host the games. And also in 1980, we had the hostage crisis, which was when the members of the it wasn't the consulate, it was
The embassy.
embassy
Yeah.
in Tehran were overrun by, it's always students who get blamed for this. I don't know if they were students or not, but they always say students did this thing. Overran the embassy and took
Anytime anything goes
hostages.
bad, I blame the students, too. So it's like,
took hostages, and the hostages stayed there until pretty much till the end of the Carter administration. So all of this was going on, and then people say, the President of the United States announces that the Soviets have amassed on the border of Afghanistan. Now, not many people in this country knew where the heck Afghanistan was. Of course, it's available on most maps. You can take a look at it. Most people didn't look. They just heard, oh, the Soviet Union, they're amassing their forces. Well, there was a common border. The Soviet Union went up to Afghanistan at that time. So this is my version of this, of course, which is somewhat positional. Of course they were there. Anyway, the U.S. was at that time propping up the government in Afghanistan. So the Soviets had decided enough. And they said, we're not going to take this anymore, so we're going to go there. And unfortunately, the President of the United States, who was the leader of the free world at the time, I mean, literally, he was the leader of the free world, President James Earl Carter, said, and we may not send our spectators or our athletes to Moscow. And it's like, whoa, sort of a loud screeching noise, as all of Europe said, wait a minute, we're with you, but the Olympic Games is something different for us. And indeed, the United States government did their best to destroy the IOC, to destroy the Moscow Games, and pretended that there could be some other games. Meanwhile, many athletes were training and hoping to be selected for the team. The team had not yet been selected, and there were many threats leveled at the U.S. Olympic Committee, and, that they would be defunded. The USOC was just beginning to go for sponsorships. They were $40,000, but that's more than zero. They were very small, but finally they were getting sponsorships to perhaps support the athletes. Until 1986, the athletes received nothing from the USOC. So in 76 and then 80, athletes were out there. Our team is always a miracle. It's always a miracle because those athletes get there on their own. There's no direction. There's nobody measuring you when you're 8 years old and projecting that you're going to be whatever height, or if you're going to have really long arms, you can be a canoe kayist. The things that they do in some countries. Every Olympian finds their way somehow to becoming a member of the Olympic team. So that's what we were busy doing. I was among those, and that's the we I speak of. And when I heard the president say, we will not be sending, I responded, I was much younger then, we, what mean we? Where was we when I was out freezing a part of my anatomy off? There was no help from the federal government. So how could the federal government then say, we will not let you go and compete? So there were athletes who fought. I was among them, and unfortunately, the lawsuit against the USOC is called DeFrantz against the USOC. And DeFrantz did not win. The athletes did not go to Moscow, although you should know that Puerto Rico was there. All of Europe was there. The only exception was that the team from England did not include the sailors or the equestrian members because the presidents of those two organizations were royalty, so they went with their ally, the U.S. Similarly, Canada, as well as Japan and West Germany, did not attend those games. So those athletes did not get to go. We're Americans. It was our president who tried to stop it. But I just feel so badly for the athletes in other countries because you cannot give this back. Decisions were made, life decisions were made to train. Life decisions were made about where you would be and how you would do it. Investments, 4 years, 8 years. Some people didn't make the 76 team, were training for 80, and that was going to be their year. Suddenly, it was gone for no reason. I was active in fighting it. I had occasion to be at one meeting where the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, his name was Davy Jones, but he was from the Air Force, go figure.
Yeah.
And I asked him, can you tell me that one life will be saved if we do not go? Just one life will be saved. And he said, no, have no idea if any lives will be saved. And so there was no purpose. Now, President Carter maintains that it was unanimous. At the USOC, it was not unanimous. It was 2 to 1. In the Congress, it was not unanimous. There were at least 3 senators who voted against it. So it was not a unanimous decision.
So you participated in 76. Were you also planning to participate in 80?
Yeah, and
Yes.
I was a member of the 1980 team. Now, here's the real shame. If you did not compete at the Olympic Games, you are not an Olympian. You might be a member of the U.S. Olympic team or the Canadian 1980 Olympic team, but you have to compete at the Games to be an Olympian. I had that opportunity, so I knew what we were missing. I knew how significant it was to be at the Games in the village. Imagine being a village of, I forget then, maybe 8,000 people, all of whom were successful. There's nothing like it. And I'll talk more about the village later.
So clearly, 1980, the U.S. boycotts the Olympics. Now, the 1984 Olympics are going to be held in the United States.
Yeah.
What's the Soviet Union going to do?
Well, that decision had already been made, by the way, and even in, I think they sent Cyrus Vance, who was Secretary of State, to open the games, supposed to be the President of the United States, in Lake Placid. Lake Placid, which is where the games were. And that was an insult to the IOC because it's the head of state who has the privilege of opening the games. And he lectured them about the Olympic movement. So this is going on. Meanwhile, we're still training to make the team because who knew? Maybe we could turn it around and we still want to be members of the team. So I'm fighting. I'm getting really mean phone calls and bad things said about me and so forth. But I believed in our national right to do what we chose to do. This is absolutely an individual effort. We say that America doesn't send the Olympic team, Americans do. That sentence came on maybe about 83, 84 when the USOC started fundraising on behalf of athletes. But in our case, we were really on our own. And it was just wrong. There were things said like if we win, our passports would be taken away from us. Well, fortunately, I was by then an attorney, so I knew that that just was more balderdash. It was not true. You have to be traveling to a state that's at war with the U.S. before your passport will be taken away.
But all of this provides tremendous context to the fact that in '84, LA is going to host the games. We were the only city that bid for them, so you could see that the demand wanting to be a host city has really declined, number one. Number two, you knew already, beginning in 1979, 1980, that half the world wasn't going to show up, because not only the Soviet Union, but probably most of the Eastern European.
No, we didn't know that until after the torch relay began. I was on the staff of the LA2024.
But one could surmise that,
LA2024.
given the Cold War and the Soviet
Yes.
Union and the United States, that,
Well,
quid pro quo.
They were planning to come. They'd come. They'd done everything. They'd visited. We'd had a series of then Soviet, U.S. track and field meets, swim meets. Everything was go. And it was because the then premier, what do you call the chief person in the Soviet Union? I've forgotten what you call it.
Secretary General,
Secretary,
yeah.
Okay. He was the one who had been a protege of the person who'd been in that position in 1980, and he felt that he had been done wrong. His mentor had been done wrong, so he decided he was going to pay back the gift. But all of this played out afterwards. And I'm sorry, I've distracted you from the point you wanted to make.
No, I was just going to say, given this background and this context, it's that by every measure, people consider the '84 Olympics successful, transformative, and really have helped to create what is now the Olympic movement, that it put it in better footing, et cetera.
Yeah. So
right?
how did the $750 million get raised? Peter Ubroth realized that sponsorship could be formed in a different way, and this was his idea. He gets the credit. He found that you could have this idea of exclusivity and therefore charge a whole lot more for the right to be the exclusive sponsor of ABC it was ABC, by the way, at the Olympic Games. And indeed, the deal struck for the television rights was phenomenal. Moscow rights, which were purchased by NBC, were $80 million, and that was the biggest number the IOC had ever seen. But the '84 games came in at $225 million plus 75 to 100 million, which went to the host broadcasting center, which was never counted in the number, but that's how much they put out for it. So having this notion of exclusivity seems small now, but Coca-Cola came in, I think, at $10 million, which was enormous. Before, they'd been maybe thousands of dollars, and they moved from that to $10 million. And that's how that, and the fact that this city has so many venues, and
Right.
had so many venues that we didn't have to build much.
Including Loyola Marymount University.
Absolutely. Now, what sport was here?
Yeah, in 1984, we hosted the weightlifting in Gersten Pavilion. And so, as a matter of fact, I was hired in 1984, and along with my contract came 2 tickets to go to the weightlifting. I also got to see, obviously, the marathon that was open to everybody, because you just line up on the street, right? There's no tickets for that. And for some weird reason, I got to see field hockey at East LA College. I don't know how that happened, but I just remember that. It was a tremendously great experience. As a matter of fact, in a small project we did over the summer, where we interviewed 50 Angelenos, randomly selected, though not representative, but randomly selected, who were of the age of 65 and older. And we asked them, what is, in your lifetime, what's the greatest event that you've seen in Los Angeles or has happened? What's the greatest thing that's happened to Los Angeles? Over a quarter of them mentioned the Olympics. And this is not that we read the list. They had to come up with that. And so it's very, front of mind that the Olympics, to many people, was the height of Los Angeles in terms of the LA experience. In addition, today at Loyola Marymount University, we released a study interviewing 2,400 LA County residents and asking them whether they support Los Angeles getting the Olympics. And it was an overwhelming number of over 80% of Angelenos believe that we should get the Olympics and are supportive of going after the Olympics and having that effort. And it cut across every single demographic and geographic group. And by the way, this is the largest general social survey done in Los Angeles this year and for the last couple of years. And so this is a pretty large survey, and has a record of a lot of accuracy that we could double check. So an incredible number. Jeff, when you hear me talk about that number, are you surprised?
Well, your track record of in surveying our city is probably the best in the city. So
Say that again to the students.
I can recall during a political campaign when you almost saved me from going into cardiac arrest because I knew that your numbers were right and it would actually be a good night and not a bad night because of what you've polled. So we aren't.
You were running for election? I don't remember that.
We aren't surprised by the numbers because people have such fond memories of 1984. They had such a wonderful experience, as your other project demonstrated. And I think they're eager to have something like that again in our city.
So, John, a lot of people talk about that the Olympics would bring economic activity, and including in our survey, the number one reason that Angelenos are supportive of the Olympics is because it would increase economic activity and create jobs. But most academic studies indicate that it's not as positive as a lot of proponents put in terms of the games. Tell me what your thinking is on this. What would the impact be economically?
Well, I think you have to take that and break it down into its component parts a little bit. I think when you hear the negativity around that, they're describing different cities and different scenarios. Mm-hmm. If we look at Los Angeles, and Jeff and Anita alluded to this, the amount of risk that this city can minimize. When you think about economic impact, there's obviously the benefits, but also the costs, mm-hmm. right? If you've seen our venue plan and our initial games concept that we just released as part of our Stage 1 deliverable, it's probably no surprise to a lot of you here that 97% of the venues either exist today, are planned by private investors, or will be temporary.
Irrespective of the Olympics.
Irrespective of the games.
So you're talking about, two stadiums that we know are going to be built, obviously in Inglewood, the LA Rams, and then the new soccer stadium next to the Coliseum.
January was a very good month. We like to say that venues fall from the sky here in Los Angeles. Yeah. But it's an important point, and the other important point as we talk about when it comes to the risk perspective is the Olympic Village. There's obviously a lot of benefits to constructing new housing, but at the same time, it's an enormous risk for any city in the world putting on the Olympic Games because of the requirements that you need. And so back in January, we announced that we would be hosting our Olympic Village, our athletes, at UCLA, which has gone...
Where?
It's another university in the other...
I've not heard of it. Is it... It can't be as nice as our campus.
It probably is, and we'll take a tour a little bit later.
Okay, yeah.
But no, I mean, all of the universities, it's a very fair point. All of the universities have undergone a tremendous amount of change with regards to housing. USC, we announced, would be host to the Media Village for the biggest congregation of media, and other universities around the world or around the city we are having discussions with that can provide opportunities, whether it's housing for officials and training venues and such. But coming back to your question, all of that says to say LA is an Olympics ready city. We could host the Olympics today and at a very minimized risk. But at the same time, this is also about how do we reimagine the games. Mm-hmm. And so the economic benefit allows us, by minimizing that risk, allows us as a bid team and hopefully as an organizing committee to be able to focus all of our attention and resources on how do we transform the games? How do we reimagine the games, whether it comes from innovating the way that the events are experienced by spectators? How do we reimagine the way that the games presentation is put on? How do we reimagine transportation around the city?
So I need to stop you at this particular point because well, Anita talked about Peter Ueberroth, and you have to understand what an important figure he was. He was the Time Magazine Man of the Year in 1984 because of the Olympics. Now, Time Magazine, many of you may not even know, it actually still exists, but it was the predominant news weekly magazine, not only in America, but in the world. And every year people would wonder who's going to be the person of the year. And we're talking about heads of states, Nobel Prize winners, et cetera. And they decided to give it to Peter Ueberroth because of the Olympics. And to a large extent, we think of the Olympics as a technical event. How do you put on this event for 2 weeks? It's a tangible target, okay? And we hired, in a sense, although I don't even know, he probably didn't even get paid, but
Last year, he got nothing.
Yeah.
This last year.
Peter Ueberroth is that back then he was probably the world's best, and we don't even have this anymore. I can't even think of the name of people who's travel agent. Okay, you guys are thinking, what's a travel agent? Because now
That's
you do.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah. But he had the largest company, et cetera, and it was at the forefront of how to do this. You needed somebody who was at the forefront of that, and so when John starts talking about transforming the games and the experience, you have to think about him and what company he's coming from, and Wasserman, and what they do is that they are now the technicians about how you experience sports, how you experience entertainment, how you put those relationships together. That's what this company does.
Well, and I wouldn't even just focus it on Wasserman, because you're correct, but as we start to think about how we bring the aspiration of this games to life here in for a new era, it's about looking at California and what California is today, and Southern California as well as Northern California, in the imagination that happens here, the organizations that are reinventing everything, whether it comes to sustainability and new energy, to transportation, to just technology in general. And there are a lot of other cities that can talk about the ability to bring those technologies to life, but no other region can talk about where people come to build things and invent things and bring those then to share to the world. It starts here in Southern California and California. And so that's a huge part, back to your question around economic benefit, allowing that to be a key part of what we're doing,
you guys,
in addition to minimizing the risk.
Will Ferrell said that you will have flying cars by the time the Olympics come. So it's like that you gotta meet that.
They had a flying man at the '84 games.
That's right. On the power pack, yeah.
Jetman.
And I think the last thing to add, sorry, Fernando, is going back to what Jeff was describing. So not only the infrastructure for the games, but the infrastructure for the city, and I think is an important piece to putting on the games. And what the city and the mayor and the city has been doing and already has been doing and is planning, regardless of the games, whether it's the close to $8 billion into renovating LAX, or the $300 billion investment, the largest transportation infrastructure project in the nation, is happening here, regardless of the games. And in 1984, there was primarily transport on roadways and on buses. Now when you look at that transport map and what things are going to be happening between now and 2024, regardless of the games, it will be a much different experience on getting around the city that will come of no cost to the organizing committee. So to your original question, we are very bullish on what the economic impact can be, A, because of what we can do to reinvent the games and really bring the games to life here, and what all comes with that, with increased spending and tourism, et cetera, but the minimizing of the risk on the other side of the balance to make this a really differentiated opportunity.
Yeah, Anita?
And LA will become the center of the world. Already, you're hearing more about Rio de Janeiro than you ever have before. Maybe you're hearing too much about it. And don't worry about the mosquitoes. The games will be at the end of the winter, beginning of spring there, so they will not be as troublesome as they might be at the dead of the summer. This is to all those athletes who might be worried about that. Going, or other people indeed, spectators. But it will be the center of the universe. So everything we do will be talked about in the newspaper. And all the things that are created here will just be amped up. So while no one really makes $1 million off of the games, and I want to disabuse anybody of that thought, I mean, how many T-shirts can you sell in 2 weeks? How many spectators are going to be? It's a 2-week sports event. Now, a lot will happen before that, and a lot that happens in LA will be talked about in the rest of the world. So it's not something, it will have an economic impact for sure. To say that it's going to be sports events have economic impact on our city, and I know the LA Sports Council does studies, and you can look those up and see how they are.
But LA has a history of privately financing and not depending on the city to, again, the Inglewood Stadium the city of Inglewood is not going to spend a dime. Sports Staples Center was totally privately financed. The new soccer stadium, privately financed. Dodger Stadium. And so you go through all that. And it's a very different dynamic.
Well, and I think that goes to the foundation that was laid in '84, but it's also, while it's in a transformative model, it's actually not similar around the world like that, but it is like that in the U.S. And your original question on what Casey's role is, he's the chairman of the LA2024 bid committee.
And how much money have you guys raised?
So far, we've raised $30 million.
So not a dime from government.
That's right. It's a completely privately financed opportunity. Our CEO that we hired, Gene Sykes, who's been with Goldman Sachs for 30 years, is come on for about the similar salary that you described Peter's salary at, the sum of about $1 for his 2 years of service.
Hopefully, we're not overpaying him.
But the point being is that what this will then transform into when we win the games is that there will be an organizing committee that will be much larger than we're at today, but that will all be privately financed again, and that's different than other cities that put on the Olympics.
Right. So you think about $30 million that Angelenos have come together to put this from a private perspective. So, Jeff, in real dollars, how much will the city of Los Angeles or taxpayers pay to have the Olympics?
They won't pay anything. I mean, what's going to happen is the city is going to have to, as part of the agreement with the International Olympic Committee, if Los Angeles is chosen, the city will guarantee the games. They will guarantee the delivery of the games. What essentially that means is that the city is saying that we won't cancel on them. They're choosing us for 2024. They won't cancel. And in exchange for that, the International Olympic Committee will give LA2024 a contribution of $1.7 billion to help us stage the games.
So the IOC will give the city of LA.
Not the city, but the LA2024 private organizing
You mean you
committee.
guys?
The successor to us.
Yeah.
Mostly John. You can trust John with 1.7. The model that Peter Uberoth created is the model that we are undertaking, which is a privately financed, privately run games for the benefit of the people of Los Angeles and everybody else that lives in Southern California and the United States.
Anita, the IOC is comfortable with that? Because typically they haven't.
Oh, yeah,
really.
no, we've been making contributions to organizing committees for a long time. In fact, the '84 games might have been the last time that they didn't contribute, because instead the LA, this is something important for you guys to know, the Los Angeles Olympic Organizing Committee wrote a check to the IOC in 1980 for $20 million. That was the first money that the IOC had ever had in that amount. And 4 years before the games, because they had negotiated the television rights in advance and then turned the money over to the IOC. That never happens. It doesn't happen anymore. And in fact, nowadays the IOC finally figured out perhaps they should negotiate the television rights, and have done that ever since, which is why, and you guys are a part of supporting the Olympic movement worldwide, and thank you for that. I have to thank you for that. I'm happy to thank you for that. Why do I say that? Because you suffer through, I shouldn't say that, I didn't say that, because you experience the advertising during the time of the games, because NBC supports itself, it's makes back the money that it's given to the Olympic movement for television rights by having sponsors take part. And why do sponsors take part? Where else do you get a part of inspiration? And that's what the games are, inspiration, because you see these athletes who look like normal humans until they get into their sports mode and do these extraordinary things. So and that's the other thing that Peter figured out, that companies would want to be a part of something that's so inspirational, and it's true. May I say one other thing about '84 as we're talking about innovation, because most people don't know this either. In 1984, we had email. Now, you guys have grown up with email, it's not a big deal, but for those of us who were born before a certain date, having email in 1984, and the world's athletes were able to use it right away. Your number was your name, your email was your name, your email address was your name, and your credential number, which was unique, and you could go on and send messages to anybody else within that. And they did use that a whole lot, and some of the messages were quite interesting. So that's the type of innovation, well advanced of email and the internet being available to the rest of the world. And that's why I don't laugh when he says flying cars.
Yeah. Well, the very first email ever sent was sent from LA. So just a fun fact there. So we are competing against Paris, Rome, and Budapest. We've held the Olympics twice, 1932 and 1984. Paris has held them twice. Rome has held them once. Budapest has never held them. In the history of the Olympics, only one city has held the Olympics 3 times. That's London. And so we would be only the second city to host them 3 times. In addition, America has hosted them quite a bit, not only the twice in Los Angeles, but also Atlanta, St. Louis.
8 times altogether.
8 times, including the
winter, summer,
summer,
and-
excuse me, the Winter Olympics. And so is it an advantage or disadvantage that Paris and LA have held them twice and Budapest hasn't?
It's today's competition. You got to look at the competition that's before
But is there a
you.
bias from the IOC to say, hey, we should go to a city that we've never been to before? You know,
The IOC is not a monolith. Each person has their own understanding of what their responsibility
but
is.
from past behavior, have we seen certain patterns? Because certainly, you know,
Nope.
when you think about Congress is not a monolith, when you think about any legislative body, there are tendencies that over the years show up in terms of their voting behavior.
If you show me a pattern, I can disabuse you of that knowledge or belief that it's a pattern because I can show you the contrary. The IOC meets once a year. We're not like Congress. There's a good chance to explain that. We meet once a year. The executive board meets 4 times or more, but we don't get together that often. So to think that we don't have a herd mentality, therefore.
Yeah.
And people live in all the continents of the world except the Arctic ones. And so their lives are based on their experiences, and they bring those experiences to the meeting. Right now, there are fewer than 100 members, and I'm not quite sure what the number is. And so and different ages, too. So our oldest member now is probably, most of them, oh no, it can't be more than 80 now because there's no life members anymore. The 80 is the oldest you can be.
So, John, Anita says there's about 100 members of the IOC. There's about 100 students here in the audience. Let's role play. There's 100 IOC members out here, nobody over 80. Okay, and you have 5 minutes to tell them why LA instead of Paris, Rome, or Budapest. What's your elevator speech?
Before I do that, can I actually set one more piece of context? 'Cause
Sure.
I think it's helpful for the previous question. Over the last year, the IOC has adopted a set of principles, a set of 40 principles called Olympic Agenda 2020. And Anita can probably give you a lot more details than I, but the principle of that is to really look at developing a more sustainable games for the new era, and looking at the past history of the previous set of bids and some of the challenges that some of the cities have had, either with narratives or, you know, not having a full slate of cities to come to the table. So I think that's important because, as Anita mentioned, there is a much different scenario that we have now. We're up against 3 very strong European cities. However, it's under a different process. It's a very new process that we're under and a very different perspective of trying to bring this games into a new era. So I think that's important context.
So kind of, in a sense, you're saying there are new rules, new ways of doing it, and things that they're looking for differently.
Yeah, I think there's a full agenda that is really trying to think about how the games can be reimagined and what they are looking for. But it's also changed the process by which the bidding is, and this actually goes towards the actual bidding process itself and how to make the bidding more sustainable. So examples of that would be, you know, not traveling to do 7 or 8 presentations around the world that cost in themselves a very significant amount of
Right.
money, and whittling those down to 3 or 4 focused. Now, something as simple as not printing out the bid packets that we just submitted, because when you have to submit that to 100 different members 3 or 4 times a year, that in itself is, you know, not only costs money, but it's an environmental challenge. So
Right.
it's all electronic submission.
Well,
So-
it's a reform agenda.
Yes.
They are reforms.
Yeah.
The IOC administration felt that that the Olympic movement going forward would be best served under reforms that really emphasized fiscal responsibility, sustainability, environmental considerations, keeping the costs of the bidding process down, making sure that athletes were at the center of the games and not on the peripheral. So there's a lot of concepts that are very, very inherent in our plans going forward. So as John gives the elevator speech,
Well,
he will tell you
This
that
is important
there's,
context.
there's
Yeah,
perfect
very-
alignment with this reform agenda that has been adopted by the IOC.
Yeah. We are at Loyola Marymount University talking about the Olympics, LA 2024, and we are going to have a quick question about the process before the elevator speech.
Okay.
What is the process and where are we in that process? Then you're going to give us the elevator speech, and then we're going to have students volunteer or be called upon to ask questions, and we'll have them come up here and introduce themselves and ask a question. So what's the process and where, you mentioned, Jeff just mentioned that you just submitted something.
So,
And is it public and we can look at it?
It is, yeah.
Okay.
So we just released our new website, LA2024.org.
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 And
you
is that where we can find that
you
video
can-
as well?
The video as of whenever it's released.
Yeah, it'll be released tomorrow morning. But the first scene is shot at Dockweiler, right here, your backyard.
Yeah,
Just-
our front yard.
Our front yard.
Okay,
You're right.
yeah.
So the process, I'll probably describe it in 4 phases. The first phase we just completed. We declared our candidacy on September 15th of 2015. The first phase, stage 1 as it's called, as part of the candidature process, just ended last Wednesday. And that was for the submission of our stage 1 deliverable that, as Fernando mentioned, you can download. It basically describes our overall vision, our master concept for the games, at a 50,000-foot level, and a lot of facts around Los Angeles that are just baselining, the city. The second phase, which we're now embarking on, is working.
Let me stop you there, though. The other cities had to do the same thing.
All the cities are going through the same
And you guys
process.
have read theirs.
Exactly. Yes, they've all made them public. The actual submission was 84
Or
questions that we had to submit on 60 pages. It was very much very specific.
Sounds like my midterm next week.
We can give you a couple of submissions for you to take a
would be
look at as
cool,
well
yeah.
and grade. And so that was submitted as part. And as part of that as well, we released our logo and released our new brand. So it's
By the
a
way,
little bit of a coming
I
out.
like the logo. How many of you like the logo? Yeah, it's cool. Well, not that many.
We'll take the feedback in the
yeah.
question part.
We can't see because the lights are so bright, but it looked like a lot of support.
Okay. 80%.
Yeah, 88% support for the logo.
The second phase that we're embarking on now will end in October, the beginning of October, and that is where we will submit. It's primarily a governance and legal guarantee deliverable. It's where we will submit a lot of the agreements with a lot of the venue owners. There's a lot of just governance around providing advertising, availability and such, but it's primarily a governance and structural. But right before that is a big component of the process, which will be the Rio Olympics in August and the Paralympics as well. And that's a point where we will actually be there as observers. We get to go down in what's called an observer program to really look behind the scenes as how the games are put on, which will then inform the rest of our bid, as well as we'll have a presence at USA House, which the USOC will put on, where we can basically describe our concept of our bid. The third phase then will go until February, so a year from now, February of 2017, and that was really the final bid book, if you will, where a lot of the high-level plans that we put together in this deliverable now will be flushed out and will be in a lot more detail from a technical perspective and really, blowing out how we can, feasibly put on the games here in Los Angeles. And then the fourth stage, we call it kind of the international promotion stage. As of February of next year, we will then technically be allowed, and this was a new part of the reforms, to promote ourselves internationally. We are allowed now in these first 3 phases allowed to promote ourselves domestically, although we can use social media without restriction. But that's when we'll be able to promote ourselves internationally. There'll be a number of...
So meaning that you can't go and speak to an IOC member who doesn't live in the United States, or?
Correct, yeah, we can't have contact
Basically,
with IOC
you
members.
can't really lobby.
Correct, unless they are as Anita was describing the structure, if they're a president of an international sports federation, we can talk to them as part of our technical.
Well,
And
let me
and
also
you'll
say,
see them in Brazil,
if
too,
you
right?
if you see them, I mean, if you go to a sports conference, so we go to a lot of sports conferences, they're there. you're certainly allowed to talk to them about the bid. I mean, there's no rule against that.
Right.
Yeah.
You just can't set up a specific meeting to go see the IOC member in the Philippines and just go.
It's really about the advertising. We're not allowed to conduct international advertising
Okay.
until February of 2017. So that's really the restriction.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then after that, you know, there theoretically could be advertising. I don't know that we would engage in that, but there could be.
Q2 of next year, there will be what's called an IOC evaluation commission that will come here for about 5 days, which will be the only visit that they'll make here, where they will evaluate every component of our bid, which will be very much a community-driven process where
Yeah.
we will have a significant amount of presence to be able to show off the city and show off our great plan.
Let us know so we can dress up.
No
and,
question,
you know,
no, it'll
clean
be
the streets.
very much of a community,
For sure.
community-engaged effort. We'll have a presentation in Lausanne in July. We'll actually have a presentation next November at the ANOC Assembly in Doha, Qatar. And then our final presentation will be in Lima, Peru in September of 17, where the IOC will also get together and vote on who will be the host city for 2024.
So September 17, a year and a half from now, is when we will learn that we're going to get the Olympics.
That's right.
Okay. All right. Elevator speech. Here's the IOC.
Well, thank you for coming here today. I think, well, first of all, Los Angeles will be able to transform the games for a new era. It will take advantage of its unbelievable and unparalleled climate and sunny weather, which thousands of athletes choose to live and train in every single day from all around the world. It will take advantage of its innovation and its epicenter of creativity to reimagine those games in every single way. It will develop a highly personalized athlete experience for the games that will have never been seen before. But at the same time, it will be the least risky, most cost-effective bid because of the infrastructure that the city is undergoing today, regardless of the games, because of the venues that exist that are all, by the way, primarily new since 1984, and venues that are being planned for that are state-of-the-art and that will be the best in the world, that already today put on global events and are used to hosting the world. And ultimately, we will be able to provide the greatest stage for the greatest event in the world.
Pretty good. Obviously, this is a biased group. LA wins right here. It's like, you know, but
Thank you for clapping, by the way.
yeah.
That was great. That was very.
Actually, we have the recording, so
yeah,
we could
we're gonna
just
need that.
yeah.
That actually, let me say that was perfectly on message because this is.
Now, the only reason Jeff is here is he wouldn't let you know, the COO come by himself because the communications director has to make sure he says the right thing. So I didn't actually want Jeff to be on the panel, but the only way that I could get John was if Jeff was here to like poke him and keep giving him notes and stuff like that. But I think he did pretty well.
Yeah, he doesn't need me anymore.
Yeah. So you're happy with that, huh?
Yeah, this is an international campaign, and it's a political campaign, but for sport. And so you want to be disciplined, you want to be on message, and we are all going to be relentless in how we talk consistently about our bid, about what we can bring in service to the Olympic movement around the world.
But does it hurt us that the USOC decided to go with Boston first?
No, we've not found any evidence that it has hurt us at all.
No, the competition didn't begin until September 15th, and with a list of cities that were delivered by the National Olympic Committees.
So what happened with Boston?
I'll step in. I think we don't speak for the USOC. Obviously, we did not agree with the decision to pick Boston. John and I were working day and night on the domestic bid, and our hearts were broken. And we really had great confidence in our bid, great confidence in our city to host the Olympics. Obviously, Los Angeles is proven its ability to host a spectacular and successful Olympics. We've done it twice, and we would be eager to do it again. And as your latest poll shows, 88% of Angelinos share our view that we'd like to bring the games back. So what the USOC decided, honestly, that was their, private decision. But we made it very clear to them that we would welcome them back, and we are now working with them very, very closely and productively.
So your heart was broken, but you're used to that, Jeff.
I am.
And then I know, Jeff. No, but then when did you get a glimmer of hope that it was turning around, that something might happen and you would stand another chance?
Well, because my heart has been broken so many times, I never really believed until they actually formally signed on with us. We never wanted to jinx it. We could never totally know for sure.
No, but there were inklings that something was going wrong with Boston.
Well, in late July, there was kind of a final act in Boston where both kind of the USOC and the mayor of Boston sort of jointly pulled out of their sort of their decision. And at that point, I was working in the mayor's office as his senior advisor. I sent out a press release within like a minute saying, we would love to have the games back. Come pick us. Come please. And so we engaged.
That was nowhere as near as elegant as what he did. Come pick us, please. That was your message? It's like...
It was better in the press release. And so we immediately re-engaged with the USOC, and I think they were very, very happy because, they are our country's stewards of the Olympic movement, and their goal and their vision, besides to promote sports throughout the country and to do well in these Olympics, are to bring the games here, because there's no better way for people in this country to experience the games than to actually have them here. And it would be amazing. You guys would love it.
And just one last thing, I think as an indicator of the strength and what the city can do to bring the games here, typically, the U.S. city would have 3 years to prepare for this process, and we essentially, didn't have those first 8 months.
Right.
But because of the leadership of Mayor Garcetti and Casey and the plans and the infrastructure and the partners that we have here, that when we called them, they were immediately back on board, everything from the universities to all the venue owners, we didn't skip a beat. We picked right back up where we needed to, and we hit the mark bang on with our first deliverable here this past week. And last week was a very, very important week for our bid, and we were very, very excited to have that springboard into the next phases, because it's going to be a very competitive 18 months, but we're right on track.
Yeah. So if any student wants to ask a question, just come up here and queue up, and then we'll let you ask a question. Anita, you were an Olympian in '76. The boycott in '80, you didn't do that. You were obviously here in '84. I'm assuming you've been to every single Olympics since 1984.
Since 80, well, I became an IOC member in '86, so I've been to 13 Olympic Games since then.
Oh. So obviously LA was your favorite, along with Montreal.
Well, yeah, you mentioned Montreal, that's fine then.
Yeah.
LA, I was a worker bee. I was a part of those who were presenting this beautiful city, the City of Angels, to the athletes of the world, and I'm prepared to do that again.
So when you think about all the Olympics and the cities, et cetera, what do you think is the advantage of a Rome or a Paris or a Budapest over LA? What do they, obviously Paris is it's Paris. Who doesn't want to go to Paris?
Well, it's really not for me to speak for them. I'll let them try and convince me. But each city will have to meet, as John was saying, the program now is each city has to meet certain tasks and send in information, 3 submissions, and at each time, a city could be asked to come back later if the submissions do not meet. But one of the things we do as IOC members is not speak against any other competitor. So they're all equal. They're
So
great
you get to
cities.
vote.
I hope I don't vote, because if I vote, it means my city is no longer a contestant.
So you are prohibited from voting because...
We used to vote when there were only possibility of 2 IOC members from a country, but when we opened up the opportunity of sports federations as well as athletes and presidents of NOCs, we had, at one point, we had 4 IOC members. Italy had 6 IOC members, and so did Switzerland. So that was not fair. So we changed it so that if anything except an election, if I'm being elected, I get to vote for myself. But anything else that has to do with my country, I can't vote on unless my country is then taken out of the running.
Right.
So my goal is
So-
to not vote.
So, question over here?
Hello, my name is Gabrielle Wilson. I'm a senior political science major, and my question to you is this. Last week, when Mayor Villaraigosa was here, he spoke about Los Angeles taking the initiative to allow nascent entrepreneurship as well as business innovators to have the opportunity to strive in terms of the different projects that are being put forth in Los Angeles. My question is, if the Olympics does come to Los Angeles, what initiative will the committee take to be in alignment with that vision?
Well, on the first step, we think California and Southern California is really the cradle of innovation and creativity we have, certainly in this country, if not around the world. As John mentioned, as part of our elevator speech to all of you, we really want to put all of our entrepreneurship and creativity and innovative capability behind staging a new games for a new era. So we welcome kind of every possible technological advancement and innovation that's possible, and we expect over the next 9 years there to be tremendous progress there. On our bid committee, we are actually starting an innovation network. So we are bringing together leaders from the creative community, from the technology community, to really come up with new ways of advancing the games. So part of that could be on-demand services like ride sharing or autonomous vehicles. There's also new ways to present sports in venues and to present sports to fans around the world. There's social media, which we're pioneering. We're actually on Thursday going to announce an innovative partnership with Snapchat, another company right down the road. So we are all about what Mayor Villaraigosa said about putting our greatest minds and creativity and our technological prowess behind our bid. Anything,
Go
anything
ahead.
else to add?
Do we know the actual dates that would happen in '24? Do we have a vague idea?
Yes.
What would
No,
that-
we know precisely.
Oh, okay, give it to it. We want to add it to our calendar.
What is it?
It's
July.
It's July 27th.
Yeah.
It's Friday, July 27th, and then it will go for 16 days, and then there'll be a 17-day intermission, and then the Paralympics will start
Right.
after that.
Which is
and
important.
They'll go to September 1st.
It's important too because that's the summer. That's during the summer. It's when there's actually less traffic anyway. It's when kids are out of school. I mean, it's a convenient time. It's not only just the summer for us, but it's a convenient time for us.
Yeah, let's hear another question. Okay, but go ahead, why don't you come up? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Liam Shepard. I'm a sophomore screenwriting major. And as someone who's not really, I'm not a huge sports person. So when I hear about Major Olympics, it's usually it's usually an event that's managed to find a larger socio-political context. You look at like some of the big Olympics that people remember. It's like the 1936, 1980s we were talking about with the Cold War, 2008. In Beijing when the Chinese government came in and was reducing their carbon footprint. They had to clean up their city basically in time for the international attention. So how would you promote LA as opposed to a city that maybe could use more international attention? Maybe you mentioned earlier, maybe this should be the time they put it in Tehran or whatever, auction it off to whatever city can take the most political refugees, or maybe if we do put it in an American city, maybe put it somewhere that could use a larger international presence that doesn't, say, have the largest media industry in the world, someplace like Detroit or Flint.
Yeah.
Or is it just about the capital gain?
Well, no, I mean, LA, we got everything already. I mean, we don't need the Olympics. I mean, we've got the Rams, we've got a great basketball team, the Clippers, et cetera, et cetera. So we, like he's saying, we get everything already. The sun, the beach, poor Budapest. I mean, they've never had an Olympics in Eastern Europe. You know, they are being impacted by.
Moscow.
That's east. That's
Okay.
we.
No, you're right. Yeah, yeah.
Us academics, we consider Russia its own continent, and Eastern Europe is, you know, so, but.
Not in NATO, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You know, and the Olympics, as he said, has the power to transform, to have a great impact, and we're already the innovator at technology. While it'll be fun to have the Olympics, it'll be great for LA. It won't help us to the same degree that it would help Rio de Janeiro, Budapest, et cetera. I'm going to put Paris and Rome with LA too. I mean, they got, everything. That's an interesting comment, right, Anita?
Yeah, you can have political discussion, you can have conventions, you can have a whole lot of things, but you can't have the Olympic Games without the athletes. And what the athletes do at the Games are the things that's what's so compelling about the Olympic Games, that they come together from all these nations. They've worked this morning. 30,000 athletes got up and thought about how today they could enhance their chances of making their team and going to Rio de Janeiro. In 2 months, there'll be only maybe 25,000 athletes. And in 4 months, there'll only be 10,000 athletes who are preparing to come to the Games. This is a massive thing that the whole world has agreed is important. And to be able to host that, to tell the athletes in our nation, we are prepared to make sure that you have the best chance to have your test with history, your best chance to go before the world and see what you've got. It's a remarkable thing to be able to do. Yeah, we don't need it. In '84, the logo didn't even say LA. It was just the star in motion. And people are like, I don't know, this one says it's just the angel. We don't need it, but we want to host the world. We want to have the celebration of human excellence, which is the Olympic Games. We want the children of our community to be a part of that. And that's, we can do it. We've done it before. It will be a new 21st century LA that will be hosting these games. It's a lot different than it was back in the 20th century, the last millennium. And we very much want the people of LA to be able to host this remarkable thing called the Olympic Games.
Yeah, implied in the question was as though the IOC could just hand the Olympics to any particular city, that a city has to apply.
Well,
you just can't give it
You
to
have to
Tehran.
want to do it.
Right.
It's not easy. This is a huge undertaking. It's a massive. That's why we give 7 years, because it takes a long time to do this. Even though we say we have everything ready and we're not going to be cruising. If we should have the right to host the games, there'll be lots of things that come up, much to do. It's an enormous undertaking, and we want to be able to do it right for the athletes.
Your argument is a very effective one that cities that have won in the past have used. For example, Rio, during their campaign, showed that the games had never been to South America.
The world.
That part of the world. So that was a very apparently persuasive argument that they made. But it does point out that this is a campaign where we have to win, 85 to 100 individual votes, and they may have, each of them may have their own reasons, and we have to persuade each and every one of them individually, and we're committed to doing
So
that.
how does the voting work? So the four cities are there. The first round, whoever finishes fourth, they drop them out,
They're gone.
and then they re-vote, or do you count the votes?
The next three,
Okay.
until there's a majority, the vote continues.
But Anita, do you get to, you don't get a rebuttal?
No discussion, there's nothing. The
it's just
vote
Vote
continues.
after vote after vote, right?
Yep.
With coffee breaks.
Nope.
No
Nope,
coffee
we
breaks?
continue now that we have.
Oh, it's like electing a pope. They put him inside the Sistine Chapel, and whites. Yeah.
Wow.
We do it electronically, although there was an issue for our voting in where the heck were we in?
At Kuala Lumpur?
KL,
Yeah.
yeah. So we had to go back to the old paper way. So we can do that, but there is absolutely no discussion between votes, and it just goes pretty fast.
So my assumption is that we're going to get the games. So John,
I like
Love
that.
to hear the
Yeah.
confidence.
well, your elevator speech was like
Love to make you an IOC member as fast as possible.
Not from our country, though, so we can vote.
What will be the most difficult thing to do once we get the games to put the Olympics on? Is there some venue? What do you think, because you've now been looking at this, what's the highest degree of difficulty for what particular task? The most challenging thing?
You just don't know. You have to be prepared to do everything. The night before the village opened, we had to re-credential 1,000 people. So we stayed up all night making new credentials because there was a flaw in them. You just don't know, and you have to be prepared. So the team has to be prepared to face every challenge. You may not think it's going to be a challenge.
But that's during the event.
No,
So there are going to be
that's
all
bidding.
kinds
No,
of
no, that's
challenges.
leading up to as
Yeah, but
well.
I'm just saying like that in terms of when you start doing your planning and you say, okay, there's 100 things we're going to have to do every month,
Yes.
right? And you put that to-do list, which one of the to-dos do you think is going to be the toughest?
See, I was going to answer it a little differently. I was going to say that I think that.
Jeff's looking at you.
What's that?
He wants to
Oh,
give you
I-
an
I-
answer.
what I'm going to say?
No, I want to hear it, yeah.
So I think
I always look to you.
the biggest challenge, which is not, I don't think it's enormous. I think the biggest challenge is making that transition from winning the games to then going from a 25, 30 person organizing bid team to upwards of 1,000 organizing an organizing committee, a 1,000 person organizing committee, and putting that project plan into place. And the reason I say that is the organization piece isn't the hard part. It's the fact that we've got so many people that are experienced in Los Angeles, that are supportive of what we're doing, going back to '84 and hearing the stories of them being volunteers, to the people that are wanting to help with the bid. It's really trying to put the organizing team together to be able to take advantage of all of that support and all of that skill sets to put on, again, as I said, the best games in history. It's certainly not a challenge that's not insurmountable, but if I had to pick one, to highlight, that would probably be it, because we're blessed with
Everybody's going to
so
want to be a part of it.
That's right. And so how do we actually do that? Because Anita's right. There's the operational pieces. There will be challenges and hiccups as you go through. And even though we have all the venues here, that will be a huge organizing undertaking. But we have the venues here. We're used to putting on big events here. We have the infrastructure here, all the things that we've been talking about, which we think we're on a great plane for.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that we had 95% of the venues. What venue would need to be built?
So the one venue that we're contemplating building right now is the canoe slalom event. It's the whitewater
The canoe slalom event. I'm trying to think, maybe the bluff, and so we can kind of build it around here and go down the bluff to Playa Vista, Palo
you
Bologna
have the
Creek,
built-in,
and then, yeah.
Iona
Iona
Creek.
Creek become the
Yeah,
water.
yeah, yeah. What do you guys think? That's something that we can host here, yeah. We're volunteering
All right.
to do that,
Noted.
so.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't even know that was a sport. It's like, that's crazy. There's a sports federation for that?
Yeah, it's part of FISA, right? It's,
No, it's the canoe kayak. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's crazy. And is that the only venue?
That'd be the only venue that we would have to, the only permanent venue that we would construct from the ground up. There will be other renovations that take place, either that are not part of the organizing committee, so what USC,
gonna do with the
university
Coliseum?
is doing, redoing the Coliseum and the other venues that we've talked about. We will do some renovations to, this was in part of our bid submission, to the Vela Sports Center, that's part of the StubHub Center, that's the
Cal
indoor
State,
cycling
I mean,
track.
yeah, yeah. Was that the same one from '84?
It was an outdoor one
Yes.
from '84.
Now it's
No,
a
that was-
soccer pitch.
Yeah. So it's the same general location, but the StubHub Soccer Stadium is where the '84 outdoor velodrome was. We'll have to do some renovations to that, but it's not a rebuild.
Right, okay. Yes.
I'd say one of the things, the bad news about having all this is now we have to make it fit together. And the Olympic overlay is no joke. If you're building it, you can build it for what you know you have to do for the Olympic Games, because it's not operating these venues independently as they would be operated today. They have to work together. They have to be hooked up, and they have to, I mean, we created another thing, creation from '84, which will be, I'm sure, modified and taken to another level, was the look. In order for television to think that it was all the same city, we had festive federalism. We had the colors that were used and decorated the venues to make them look like they were the same set. And internally, you have to make them operate the same way so that they can be. And that is really the greatest challenge, and most organizing committees underestimate the challenge of doing that.
Yeah. Now, we call it the LA Olympics, but it's not just the city, it's the county of LA. They're going to be all kinds of, even some venues that will be outside of LA County, isn't that correct?
There are a few. I mean, we've put together a 4-cluster plan, as opposed to other Olympics that have one central Olympic park. We're taking advantage of clusters of locations that already exist. The furthest one being, as we've planned it, Lake Casitas, which will be the rowing venue, which was the rowing venue in 1984. It'd be about a 45, 50-minute drive away. And then the other thing that will be actually taken around the country, which will be the same for all the other bids as well, is football, soccer. The finals and the medal rounds will be played here at the Rose Bowl, but the preliminary rounds will take place all over the country, and we've not yet selected those venues.
Oh, okay, that's very cool.
Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, similar handles, and
And
there's
like
a
us.
place on our website that you can actually sign up to be able to get regular updates
There
from
you
our
go.
communications team and be a part of our massive amount of supporting team.
Right. I want to thank our guests to talk about the Olympics, and let's give them a great LMU thank you. So, thanks. All right.